Last night, the person you love couldn't stop thinking about you. Then something unexpected happened. Something happened last night, while the world became quiet and the stars watched over sleeping homes. The person you love found themselves unable to close the door on one thought. Again and again, your memory returned without warning. It arrived softly, like a breeze through an open window. It stayed longer than they expected. They tried to focus on other things. They looked away. They reached for ordinary distractions. Yet every path led back to the same place, back to you. They could not explain why your name seemed to echo inside their heart when everything around them had become still. And that was only the beginning. Another layer is waiting. There was no loud sign. No bright flash across the sky. Only a quiet feeling that refused to leave. Sometimes the deepest moments enter life without making any noise at all. They simply settle into the soul until everything feels different. The person you love sensed that change, even if they could not find the words for it. They wondered why an ordinary evening suddenly felt so meaningful. Why did silence feel full instead of empty? Why did memories that had been sleeping suddenly wake up? Those questions stayed with them long after midnight. But another question was already waiting. Perhaps you have felt something too. Maybe you woke this morning carrying a feeling you could not explain. Not sadness. Not joy. Just a quiet pull inside your heart. The kind that makes you pause before speaking. The kind that makes familiar places feel slightly different. These moments often arrive before understanding does. They invite patience instead of quick answers. And sometimes the smallest feeling becomes the first page of a much larger story. Yet the story has not opened completely. Another piece remains hidden. The person you love remembered a simple moment. Nothing dramatic. Just a smile. A conversation. A glance that lasted one heartbeat longer than expected. Strange how the smallest memories often become the strongest ones. They do not ask for attention. They simply stay. Last night those quiet memories returned with surprising strength. They were not forced. They appeared naturally, as though the heart had decided it was finally time to look at them again. But one memory stood apart from all the others. Its meaning is still unfolding. They asked themselves a gentle question. What if some connections are not measured by how often two people speak? What if they are measured by how deeply they continue to remember each other, even during ordinary days? That question did not bring an answer. Instead, it opened another door. Sometimes the best questions do not solve anything right away. They simply lead us toward a truth we are ready to discover little by little. And another door has already begun to open. The night grew even quieter. Outside, nothing seemed unusual. Inside, everything felt different. The person you love noticed that peace and uncertainty can exist together. They realized a heart can carry hope even while it waits. Waiting is often misunderstood. Many think waiting means nothing is happening. But some of life's deepest changes grow where no one can see them. Like roots beneath the ground before the first flower appears. Yet the roots were reaching toward something unexpected. You'll understand soon. Then something happened that they never planned for. A single thought crossed their mind, and it changed the feeling of the entire night. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It simply arrived with quiet clarity. They wondered if you had ever realized how much your presence had shaped moments you never even noticed. That thought stayed with them. It would not leave. It gently asked to be heard. But before they could understand why it mattered so much, another feeling entered the room. The biggest truth is still hidden. Before I continue, if this message is touching your heart, you are welcome to support this work with a super thanks. Only if it feels right for you. Now, let's continue. After that quiet pause, everything seemed even more meaningful. Sometimes gratitude clears space for deeper understanding. The person you love sat with their thoughts a little longer. They were no longer trying to escape them. Instead, they allowed every memory to arrive naturally. Some memories made them smile. Others made them wonder what might have been left unsaid. Yet none of those memories carried regret alone. They carried possibility. And possibility has a way of changing everything without announcing itself. Another truth is waiting. Then they noticed something unexpected. The future did not seem as fixed as it had only hours before. They began to understand that life is always moving, even when nothing on the outside appears to change. Hearts continue growing. Perspectives continue shifting. Quiet prayers continue rising. Gentle hope keeps breathing beneath ordinary days. Perhaps the greatest changes begin exactly this way, hidden inside moments most people would overlook. But this change was connected to something far more personal. Another layer is about to appear. Imagine standing beside a calm lake before sunrise. The water reflects everything perfectly, yet one tiny ripple can change the entire picture. Hearts are much the same. One unexpected thought. One remembered kindness. One moment of honesty. Suddenly the reflection becomes different. Last night felt like that. The ripple was small. Its effect was not. Still, the reason behind it remains just beyond sight. Final piece. There is something beautiful about not rushing every answer. Some gifts lose their meaning when opened too quickly. They need time. They need quiet. They need space to grow into. Something the heart can truly recognize. The person you love may not fully understand what began inside them last night. Perhaps you do not either. That is perfectly all right. Some journeys are meant to unfold one gentle step at a time. Another page has not yet turned, as the first light of morning reached the horizon, nothing around them looked different. The streets remained the same. The sky welcomed another day. Yet inside, a quiet shift had already taken place. They carried it with them into the morning without fully realizing it. Somewhere between yesterday and today, hope had become a little stronger than fear. Questions had become a little gentler than worry. And one thought continued returning with peaceful persistence. But why did that single thought refuse to disappear? Why did it arrive with such perfect timing? And what unseen thread connected your heart to theirs in the silence of last night? Those answers are still resting behind a curtain that has only begun to move. And as that curtain slowly opens, another unexpected moment is already drawing closer. While the greatest part of this story remains unwritten, the quiet feeling followed them into the day. It did not fade with the morning light. It did not disappear beneath busy thoughts or daily routines. Instead, it stayed close, like a gentle whisper that could not quite be heard but could certainly be felt. They smiled without knowing why. Then, only a few moments later, they became strangely thoughtful again. Their own hearts seemed to be asking questions they had never stopped to ask before. But one question stood above all the others: why now? Another layer is still waiting. They tried to convince themselves it was only a passing feeling. Perhaps it was simply a memory returning for no reason. Perhaps it was only one of those quiet moments that come and go without changing anything. Yet every time they reached that conclusion, another memory quietly appeared. Not to interrupt them, but to invite them deeper. It was as if the heart was gently saying, "Look once more." They listened, even though they did not yet understand why. The biggest truth remains hidden. Then something small caught their attention. A familiar song began to play somewhere nearby. They had heard it many times before. But this time it sounded different. Every word seemed to carry more meaning than it had yesterday. Strange how life can change without changing at all. Sometimes it is not the world that becomes different. Sometimes it is simply the heart that begins to hear differently. And once that happens, ordinary moments begin carrying extraordinary weight. But another piece has not yet been revealed. They wondered if you had ever felt the same quiet pull. Not the kind that demands an answer, the kind that patiently waits. The feeling that reminds us some people leave gentle fingerprints on our lives without ever realizing it. Even after distance. Even after silence. Even after time continues moving forward. Those invisible marks remain. They shape how we remember. They shape how we hope. And sometimes they quietly shape tomorrow before tomorrow even arrives. Yet another page is still turning. For a brief moment, they almost reached out, their hand paused, their thoughts paused, even time itself seemed to slow inside that single breath. Then they stopped. Not because they had forgotten, not because the feeling had disappeared, but because they sensed something was still unfolding beneath the surface. They felt there was one more quiet lesson waiting before any words could truly mean what they wanted them to mean. Another truth is waiting just ahead. Meanwhile, something inside you may also be changing. Perhaps you cannot explain it. Perhaps you have simply noticed that certain memories arrive more gently now. Perhaps your heart feels a little lighter than it did before. Sometimes two stories move toward one another without either person seeing the entire path. Neither story controls the other. Yet both continue growing through kindness, patience, and quiet reflection. And every step prepares the next one in ways that only become clear much later. But that moment has not arrived yet. There is a reason hope often speaks so softly. If it shouted, we might mistake it for excitement. If it rushed, we might confuse it with fear. Instead, hope walks beside us one peaceful step at a time. It reminds us that not every meaningful change announces itself. Some of the greatest blessings begin as simple thoughts that refuse to disappear. Last night may have been one of those moments. But another layer remains unseen. The person you love looked toward the evening sky once again, not searching, not chasing, simply breathing. They realized something beautiful. The heart grows strongest when it stops forcing every answer. Some questions become gifts simply because they remain unanswered for a little while longer. They leave room for grace. They leave room for healing. They leave room for unexpected joy to enter through doors we never thought to open. Yet one door is still only slightly open, then another realization arrived. What if the most important part of this story is not what happened last night? What if it is who both of you are quietly becoming because of it? That thought settled deeply. No loud promise followed. No perfect explanation appeared. Only peace. And sometimes peace itself is the beginning of something far greater than certainty. But the full meaning is still beyond the horizon. As evening slowly returns once more, the same quiet question continues floating between two hearts that may never have asked it aloud. Why did one ordinary night suddenly feel unforgettable? Why did a single memory become impossible to ignore? And why does it feel as though the next chapter has already begun, even though no one has seen its first page? Those answers remain wrapped in gentle silence. The story is still breathing. The next moment has not yet revealed its purpose, and somewhere beyond what either heart can presently see, another quiet surprise is already beginning to unfold. Last night, while you were trying to convince yourself that everything would eventually make sense, something was happening beyond your awareness. The silence you thought surrounded your story was never truly empty. Somewhere, someone you have carried deep inside your heart lay awake long after the world had fallen asleep. They closed their eyes again and again, hoping to escape the memories that kept returning, but every attempt only brought you back more clearly. They thought they had buried those emotions, yet the darkness of the night refused to let them hide from the truth, and before the sun could rise, something happened that neither of you could have predicted. You have probably asked yourself countless times whether they ever truly thought about you when you weren't around. You wondered if your name had become just another forgotten chapter or if some invisible part of them still carried your presence. Those questions followed you through quiet mornings and lonely evenings, never fully disappearing. What you didn't know was that the answers were beginning to form while you were losing hope. The heart has its own mysterious clock, and sometimes it waits until everything seems impossible before revealing what it has been protecting all along. But one memory refused to stay in the past. It began with something so ordinary that it almost seemed meaningless. A familiar melody drifted through the room. It wasn't even a song they intentionally chose. It simply appeared, filling the silence with emotions they thought they had already conquered. Suddenly, they weren't standing in the present anymore. They were standing inside a memory where your laughter echoed louder than the music itself. Every smile you shared, every unfinished conversation, every glance they once overlooked returned with startling clarity. They tried to shake it off, but memories have a strange power when the soul is finally ready to listen. And then another sign appeared. Have you ever noticed how certain nights feel different without any obvious reason? The air seems heavier. Time slows down. Your thoughts become louder than the world around you. Last night carried that kind of energy. It wasn't just another evening. It was the kind of night that quietly rearranges lives while nobody is paying attention. Somewhere between midnight and dawn, they found themselves staring into the darkness, asking questions they had spent months avoiding. And for the first time, the answers frightened them more than the questions ever had, because they were finally beginning to understand what they had truly lost. While they wrestled with their thoughts, you were following your own journey without realizing how deeply connected your paths still remained. You have changed more than you give yourself credit for. Every disappointment taught you patience. Every unanswered message taught you resilience. Every lonely moment slowly transformed your heart into something stronger, quieter, and wiser. You believed your healing was happening in isolation, but healing sends out invisible waves. Those waves travel farther than you can imagine, touching hearts that once seemed completely unreachable, including the one that could no longer escape your absence. They remembered the smallest details first. Not the dramatic moments. Not the emotional conversations. Instead, they remembered the way you looked at ordinary things with hope. The way your voice softened when you talked about your dreams. The little expressions on your face that made even quiet moments feel unforgettable. Funny how the soul preserves what the mind forgets. Those tiny memories became impossible to silence, and with every passing hour, they realized those moments had never stopped living inside them, though they still didn't understand why the memories had returned so suddenly. The strange thing about destiny is that it rarely announces itself with fireworks. It whispers before it speaks. It nudges before it pushes. It places signs in your path so gently that most people mistake them for coincidence. Last night, those whispers became impossible to ignore. A random conversation reminded them of something you once said. A passing stranger carried a familiar smile. Even the night sky seemed strangely comforting, as though the universe itself was trying to point them toward a truth they had spent too long avoiding. But just as everything began making sense, an unexpected interruption changed the direction of the night. their phone lit up. For a brief moment, they thought it might be you. Their heart reacted before logic had a chance to speak. Hope rushed in faster than reason. But it wasn't your name on the screen. It was someone else. Someone who unknowingly asked a simple question that opened a door they had worked so hard to keep closed. Are you really happy? Those 4 words echoed louder than they expected. They couldn't answer immediately because the truth had been waiting beneath the surface all along, and that truth was impossible to ignore anymore. Meanwhile, somewhere deep inside, you may have felt something you couldn't explain. Perhaps you woke up in the middle of the night for no reason. Maybe you dreamed about someone whose face lingered after sunrise. Maybe your heart suddenly felt heavy before becoming strangely peaceful. You dismissed it as coincidence because that's what people usually do when life moves in ways they can't explain. But sometimes your soul notices change long before your mind has enough evidence to believe it. Last night, your spirit may have sensed a shift that words cannot fully describe, though its meaning has not completely revealed itself yet. Love is rarely defeated by distance alone. More often, it is buried beneath fear, pride, misunderstanding, and timing. Those invisible barriers convince people that walking away is easier than staying vulnerable. The person you love believed those barriers would eventually erase what they felt. Instead, every mile of distance only magnified what remained unfinished. Every attempt to move forward somehow circled back to you. Last night was the first time they stopped resisting that painful realization, but accepting the truth and acting on it are 2 very different things. As the hours passed, they found themselves revisiting every decision they had made. They questioned conversations they once dismissed. They replayed moments they thought had no meaning. Regret has a unique way of revealing hidden treasures buried beneath ordinary memories. Suddenly, they saw your kindness differently. They understood your patience differently. They even recognized mistakes they had never admitted before. Each realization became another crack in the walls surrounding their heart. Until one final memory shattered almost everything. It wasn't a perfect memory. It wasn't your happiest moment together. It was the moment you silently chose understanding over anger. The moment you showed grace when you had every reason to walk away. At the time, they barely noticed the significance of it. Last night, that memory returned with overwhelming clarity. They realized they had mistaken quiet strength for weakness. They had misunderstood your love because they had not yet learned how to receive it. That realization carried a weight they could barely hold, and tears they never expected began to fall. Sometimes the greatest transformations happen when nobody else is watching. No audience. No applause. No dramatic speeches. Just one heart finally surrendering to honesty. That is exactly what unfolded in the stillness before dawn. For the first time, they stopped blaming circumstances. They stopped blaming timing. They stopped blaming everything outside themselves. Instead, they faced the one truth they had feared the most. They never truly stopped loving you. They only convinced themselves they had no other choice, until last night proved otherwise. At the very same time, your own journey was reaching a quiet turning point. Without realizing it, you had begun releasing expectations that once controlled your happiness. You were slowly discovering peace within yourself instead of searching for it in someone else's decisions. Ironically, that inner peace changed your energy more than any desperate effort ever could. The version of you that now stands before the future is stronger than the one who first entered this story. And sometimes, life waits for that transformation before allowing certain doors to open, though one final test still remains. Not every sign is meant to predict the future. Some signs simply prepare your heart to recognize it when it arrives. The unusual dreams. The repeated numbers. The familiar songs. The chance encounters that feel strangely meaningful. Whether you see them as coincidence or something greater, they invite you to slow down and pay attention. They remind you that unseen movements often begin long before visible change appears. Last night may have been one of those invisible turning points, but the biggest revelation had not happened yet. Just before sunrise, something unexpected unfolded. It wasn't a message, it wasn't a phone call, it wasn't the dramatic moment anyone would have imagined. Instead, it was a decision, a quiet, deeply personal decision made entirely within their own heart. They decided they could no longer keep pretending that forgetting you was possible. They chose to stop running from what they truly felt. They admitted that every road they explored somehow led back to your memory. And once that decision settled inside them, the future began shifting in ways neither of you could yet see. Because decisions made in silence often echo the loudest through destiny, now everything feels suspended between two worlds. One is the past, filled with unanswered questions, missed chances, and lingering pain. The other is a future that has not fully revealed its face. You are standing exactly where transformation always begins, in the space between uncertainty and hope. Every lesson you've learned, every tear you've cried, every moment you thought you were forgotten has quietly prepared you for what comes next. Yet there is one truth that remains hidden, one final piece of the story that neither you nor the person you love has discovered, because while they spent last night thinking they had finally uncovered the deepest secret of their heart, they had no idea that someone else had already made a move before sunrise, and the moment you discover who that person is, everything you believed about this connection will change forever.